Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. So, why don't tutorials work? How does learning actually happen? And can you get any benefit out of tutorials? Those are the three questions I want to answer. Okay, first question, why don't tutorials work? There's even a term for this called tutorial hell, where you just keep circling around knowledge but don't actually grasp anything. You feel like you can do things, but then as soon as you step out on your own, you realize you don't actually understand it. First of all, one of the reasons these things fail is because sometimes when you explain a tutorial, you do it in a way that doesn't actually give the rationale behind it. And as somebody who does tutorials, I know I've fallen into this trap a lot, where I just give you kind of the outcome. I don't actually explain how it works. So you get this false sense of security that you actually understand it, but as soon as you again step out on your own, you realize, hey, I don't actually know what's going on here. But also, tutorials themselves often test the person giving the tutorial. It tests their explanation on their grasp of the concept. It doesn't necessarily test your comprehension. Here's what I mean by this. When you run across a really good teacher, as soon as they explain something, you often say, oh, I get that. That's super easy. Now, what you've actually tested is their ability to explain a concept. And when they explain it and they're good at it, you will then say, I get it, because it makes sense. However, until you actually implement it on your own, you don't actually test your own comprehension, just their ability to explain. So often tutorials really aren't meant for you. It's more the teacher's opportunity to explain how well they can explain something, or to show how well they can explain it. Now, that doesn't mean tutorials are useless. And at the end of the video, I'm going to talk through 3 strategies I use to actually get benefit out of tutorials. The second question is, how does learning actually happen? And while this is very personal, I can at least give you my experience. There's kind of 3 stages to learning. The very first stage is when you're trying to build something out and basically all you're doing is hitting errors. One after the other, you keep having to turn to documentation or realize that you misunderstood something or assumed something that wasn't there. And when you hit these error zones, that's actually kind of the first stage of real learning. Now, often you find you were asking the wrong questions, or that you proposed the wrong solutions, or that you didn't understand the scope of the problem itself, or the scope that the solution needed to have. Now, hitting all of these roadblocks, I always kind of think about it as an arrow. In fact, that's one of the reasons I like to do tutorials live on Livestream, because what it does is it points a huge fat arrow to the thing I do not understand, that I thought I did sometimes. This has happened before on my channel where I was building something out. I needed to use the reduce method in JavaScript, and I realized I don't really understand how this thing works. I thought I did, but clearly doing this live shows me I don't actually get it. Well, what does that do for me? Of course, it's a failure, but on the other hand, what it is a grace to me. It shows me the area that I actually need help in. So whenever you hit errors in learning in this stage 1, what you find is it actually is an arrow telling you what to learn next, which is super helpful because then you know where to put your attention. Number 2, the second stage of learning I found is kind of optimizing code. So once it's actually functioning properly, I almost always go back through and realize, hey, there's a bunch of stuff here to refactor. Now again, here, this might just be optimizing look or performance or removing unnecessary items or making trade-offs and decisions about what's most important in this application. Now, when you're doing that, you're kind of moving past just understanding how it works and making it work, and you're really saying, okay, what is necessary here? That second stage is also really helpful for learning. It doesn't often provide like as easy things to work on next, but that is a lot of what coding is. It's taking something that is functional or is working and really kind of squeezing it to get the best out of it. That second stage can be super helpful in kind of honing your skills. And then third, and this is where I've really stepped into the channel and found most helpful, the third stage of learning for me is teaching. Now, once you have to teach something, you can't just make sure it works. You have to make sure you understand how it works in a way that you can explain it to somebody. Now, this provides rationale for people. You're actually giving them reasons. And you're also able to frame the error and the solution and kind of tell a story. Now, sometimes I do better at that than others, but really that third stage is where I find I really know I know something. First stage, I feel like, okay, I know what I don't know. Second stage, I'm like, I know what I do know. And the third stage, I explain both the rationale and the actual solution. Now, the trouble with just tutorials is if you're only watching the tutorials, you actually miss all 3 of these stages. You don't actually get to wrestle through errors unless you're just mistyping what you see on the screen. You don't actually optimize the code at all. Instead, you're just taking whatever they've given you and going from there. And you're certainly not teaching anyone unless you take what you've done and then show it to somebody afterwards. So these 3 stages of learning are super important. So let's put these 2 things together and ask how you can actually get benefit out of real tutorials. So should you just take every tutorial you know and bundle it up and throw it in the trash? Well, no, I'm not suggesting that. In fact, I actually find that there are 3 different methods you can take with tutorials that help you get the most benefit out of them. I call them the apprentice, the scientist, and the artist. The apprentice, first of all. The apprentice is somebody who watches the tutorial carefully, goes through it, then puts it down afterwards, thinking that they understand it, and says, I'm going to do it a second time. You've watched the master teacher, hopefully, and you understand what's going on, but you get to now test your comprehension the second time through. And when you run into errors, instead of turning back to the tutorial, do it like you would if you were by yourself. Start Googling it, looking at Stack Overflow, asking ChatGPT, whatever your methods happen to be, to try to figure out kind of how to get the optimized solution in the end. Then you can go back to the tutorial, back to the master and say, okay, did I do something better than they did? Or did I just do it differently than they did? And why did they make the decisions they did versus what I did? So that apprentice method allows you to kind of be guided the first time and then kind of explore yourself the second time and get the benefit of really that first stage of learning. The second way to approach things is what I like to call the scientist. Now, the scientist does the tutorial along with the master teacher, but as they're doing it, they listen to her or him teach it, and then they decide, okay, you know what? I'm going to tweak this part and make it a little bit different. Really, what you're doing is optimizing that second layer of learning. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I understand this well enough to be able to take this part out and put this other part in. So once you get to the stage where you can kind of be a scientist when you're going through tutorials, you'll often find that your end project looks different than theirs, sometimes by quite a bit. But you've actually taken apart the little pieces as you've gone, and you understand how it all fits together. Now, that can be a really helpful layer of learning. And again, that really layers in that second way I'm talking about learning, which is optimizing code. And you're doing that kind of as you're building out the tutorial. So for instance, I took Wes Boss's JavaScript for 30 course. I don't think I did a single tutorial exactly as he did it. I would just kind of start in with him, and then I would add my own stuff and change stuff around. And I'm sure if I looked at my code, he did a ton of stuff better, but I just added on to it, right? I took a part and added extra pieces in and took some pieces out. And I found that by doing that, not only was it more engaging, but I actually had real questions. And then watching the tutorial helped me answer those things. The third stage is what I'm calling the artist. This third stage of looking at tutorials is saying, hey, let me just see what the finished result is. That's interesting. Now, before I even watch the tutorial, I'm going to try to do it myself. Now there, you actually get the benefit of all three stages of learning. You're doing it, you're optimizing it, and then you're kind of having to talk through why you chose the things you did when you then go and walk back through the tutorial. At that point, you'll say, okay, they did it this way, I did it this way, here's why I did it this way. And what you're doing is reasoning through all of that. So these three stages, the apprentice, the scientist, and the artist, I found to be really effective methods of actually using tutorials and getting the benefit out of them. Well, I hope this has been helpful. If you like this kind of video where I just talk through concepts, let me know. I think we don't talk about these things enough, and I hope that's helpful to somebody. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.